My name is Rosa, and I've always been drawn to stories of the supernatural. Ever since I was a child, growing up in the small village near Haunted Street, I've heard the chilling tales that made our blood run cold. This haunted street was a street cloaked in shadows, with ancient trees lining its edges, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. Among these trees stood the infamous haunted tree, its roots snaking across the road like a sleeping dragon. The road was known for its eerie atmosphere and chilling legends, but none were as terrifying as the tale of the Weeping Bride. The legend began many years ago with a woman named Maria. She was the most beautiful girl in the village, her dark hair flowing like a river of ink, and her eyes as bright as the morning star. Maria was deeply in love with a man named Carlos, and their love was the talk of the town. They were to be married, and the whole village was excited for the grand wedding. However, on the eve of their wedding, tragedy struck. Carlos was found dead in the forest near the haunted street. His body was cold, his eyes wide open in terror. No one knew what had happened, and the villagers whispered that it was the curse of the haunted tree. Heartbroken and devastated, Maria put on her wedding dress and walked to Haunted Street, where she stood under the ancient tree and wept for her lost love. She cried and cried until her heart could bear no more, and there, under the shadow of the haunted tree, she took her own life. Since that fateful night, drivers on this haunted street have reported seeing a ghostly figure in a white wedding dress. She stands by the side of the road, her face hidden by a veil, weeping softly. Some say if you stop to offer her a ride, she will get into your car and ask you to take her to the church. If you refuse, she disappears, but if you agree, she will sit silently until you reach the church. As soon as you arrive, she vanishes, leaving behind only the scent of her bridal bouquet. One stormy night, a young man named Miguel was driving home on the haunted street. The rain pounded on his car, and the wind howled like a beast in pain. As he approached the old haunted tree, he saw her, the weeping bride, standing alone in the rain. Miguel was a kind-hearted person, and despite the terrifying stories, he felt a surge of pity for the lonely figure. He stopped his car and rolled down the window. "Miss, do you need help?" he asked. The bride lifted her head, her eyes red from crying. "Please, take me to the church," she whispered. Miguel nodded and unlocked the door. The bride slid into the back seat, her presence filling the car with a cold chill. Miguel drove in silence, glancing at her in the rear-view mirror. She stared out the window, her veil hiding her face. When they reached the church, Miguel turned to speak to her, but she was gone. The seat where she had been sitting was wet, and the scent of flowers lingered in the air. Shaken, Miguel drove home, his heart pounding in his chest. The next day, Miguel told his friends about the encounter. They listened with wide eyes and nervous laughter, but one of them, Javier, scoffed. "It's just a silly ghost story," he said. "I bet you imagine the whole thing." Determined to prove it was real, Javier decided to drive down the haunted street that night. The road was dark and empty, the only sound the hum of his engine. As he neared the haunted tree, he saw her, the weeping bride, standing under the tree, her veil soaked with rain. Javier stopped and rolled down his window. "Need a ride, lady?" he asked with a smirk. "Take me to the church," she whispered, her voice soft and pleading. "Sure thing," Javier said, trying to hide his fear as she climbed into the back seat. As they drove, the temperature in the car dropped. Javier glanced in the mirror, but the bride just stared out the window, weeping quietly. When they arrived at the church, she was gone. The back seat was drenched, and the scent of flowers was overwhelming. Javier's bravado faded, and he raced home, his mind racing with fear. The next day, he fell ill with a high fever, his dreams haunted by the image of the weeping bride. He grew weaker each day, his skin pale and clammy, until finally, he passed away, his eyes wide open in terror. Word of Javier's death spread through the village, and the legend of the weeping bride grew stronger. People avoided the haunted street, especially at night. But some, driven by curiosity or disbelief, ventured down the haunted road, only to return with chilling stories or not return at all. Years later, a young girl named Rosa, fascinated by the tales, decided to learn the truth. She spent days researching the history of the haunted street and the legend of the weeping bride. One evening, she visited an old woman in the village who was known to know the ancient stories. The bride's name was Maria, the old woman said. Her spirit is trapped in sorrow, unable to move on. Only a pure heart can free her. Rosa was determined to help. She prepared a bouquet of fresh flowers and drove to the haunted street. The night was eerily quiet, the moon casting ghostly shadows on the road. As she neared the haunted tree, she saw Maria, standing alone and weeping. "Maria," Rosa called out, stepping out of her car. "I've come to help you." The bride looked up, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I need to go to the church," she whispered. Rosa nodded and handed her the bouquet. "Come with me," she said. Maria's ghostly form glided into the car, and Rosa drove to the church. As they arrived, the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. Rosa opened the car door, and Maria stepped out, her veil lifting to reveal a beautiful, tear-streaked face. "Thank you," Maria whispered. "You have freed me." With that, she faded away, the bouquet falling to the ground. The scent of flowers filled the air, and Rosa felt a warmth spread through her heart. The curse was broken, and the weeping bride was at peace. From that day on, the haunted drive was just another road, the legend of the weeping bride fading into history. But some nights, when the wind rustles through the leaves and the moonlight casts eerie shadows, people still whisper about the bride who wept for love and the brave girl who set her free.